Next, we're going to have a topic that I'm personally really excited about. It's something that has been said that this technology will change the world like the internet did. This technology eliminates all the costly middlemen in the financial transactions, but it also provides opportunities to so much more. It can be used in sharing economy, electricity market, and property and securities. But is this hype around blockchain justified? How is this peer-to-peer network and the decentralized future going to look like? We will have 5 persons on the stage to tell us more about it.
Yes, and they are Paul Puey, who is the CEO and co-founder at Airbitz, which is the leading single sign-on security platform for blockchain technology and decentralized applications. Joining Paul will be Elizabeth Stark, who is the co-founder and CEO of Lightning, where she is building a programmable financial layer for the internet through fast, scalable blockchain transactions. This woman has taught at Stanford and Yale University about the future of the internet. Also, joining Elizabeth and Paul is Brian Behlendorf, who is the executive director of the Hyperledger project. They are building blockchain technologies with the Linux Foundation.
We will have Thomas Conté, who is a cloud computing professional and currently technical evangelist from Microsoft Azure. Also, we will have Jutta Steiner, who has a PhD in applied mathematics, works currently in Berlin and London as the COO and co-founder of Ethcore. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Paul, Elizabeth, Brian, Thomas, and Jutta.
Welcome.
Nice.
Okay. Very warm.
Awesome. Finally, a fireside chat with a fire. I'm sure everyone's been saying that. So I think we've got a great group of people here, a lot of thought leaders in the space of blockchain. And I think we're going to be able to educate people really well on what this space is doing, what it does well at, what it potentially doesn't do so well at. But let's start off with a quick introduction. If you guys want to do quick 15, 20 seconds, be able to introduce yourself, maybe expand on what some of the hosts were mentioning, and give an idea to the audience, what we're doing in this space. Want to start off, Elizabeth?
Hey, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Stark, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Lightning. We are scaling blockchains. The scalability issue has been something that has been discussed a lot within the community, and certain people have been doubtful that these technologies can scale, but we are actually building the technology that does it.
Awesome, cool.
Great.
All right,
I'm Brian Behlendorf at the Hyperledger project at the Linux Foundation. What we're building is a platform, a series of platforms actually, all of them open source, for building a blockchain technology. The key thing here is to think about where are the standards in this space, where are the underlying free bits that we can build upon in the same way that the internet was built, in the same way that the Linux ecosystem was built. How do we bring together companies and individual developers to build that so that we can all move much faster to building the interesting apps and applications on top.
Cool. Thomas?
I'm Thomas Conté. So I work for Microsoft on our Azure cloud platform. And basically, I try to help our traditional customers, typically large enterprises, figure out some of these emerging workloads and ecosystems. Like I worked in IoT a bit and blockchain for a while now. And basically, we're trying to accelerate their learning through experiments by onboarding, blockchain stacks on our cloud and helping them try it out.
Hi, my name is Jutta Steiner. I'm a COO of Parity, formerly called Ethcore. We work on the fundamental technology, and we were initially involved with the Ethereum network, which is at the moment the second biggest blockchain network out there. We are going to start a new blockchain, which some people might call blockchain 3.0 after Ethereum being 2.0 next year, called the Polkadot network, which also addresses scalability issues.
Very cool. My name is Paul Puey. I'm CEO and co-founder of Airbitz. And we complete the user experience for blockchain by dealing with key management, allowing people to secure keys for blockchains, which is one of the unique things about blockchains. is that you can't authenticate with them using a conventional username and password, so key management becomes pretty key. Not to repeat myself. So kind of, I'm assuming a lot of the audience is definitely fairly new to the concept of blockchain. It's very abstract. It's not a concept that applies very well to traditional technologies and tech stacks that we deal with today. And there's different ways to implement blockchain. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go around and kind of describe, relative to what you do in the blockchain space, how you would define it and describe it to the audience. And hopefully we'll get kind of a variety of our own descriptions. So anyone who would like to kind of jump in?
Well, I think the two pieces to really know about are the distributed ledger and the smart contract layer. Right? So a distributed ledger is something that is actually really novel out there. It's something we haven't had a lot of on the internet until the Satoshi Nakamoto paper in 2008 really put it forward and said, what's interesting to build is this common database, you can think of it that way, a common log file that everybody is guaranteed to have exactly the same copy of, that's guaranteed to be in the exact same order. And that's how you keep track of things like tokens in a cryptocurrency. But you can also use it to keep track of properties in a land title registry. You could also use it to keep track of carbon emissions and trading of credits around those carbon emissions. To do the kinds of things that ordinarily on the internet, because anything is copyable, and we all have different databases, and knowing what's in my database is tough, and synchronizing that with what's in your database, it requires kind of a settlement phase. Mm-hmm. This is something that is instantly settlable, right? So something like this, the most naive application of it would be changing the banking wire networks to being something that is immediately settlable, rather than something where you wire something and then wait 3 days, 4 days later for that to actually be finalized. Instead, with a distributed shared ledger, everybody on that network agrees at exactly the same time. This is definitely something that happened, something that was registered, and everyone confirms it. And then smart contracts build on top of that. It's kind of like software that sits on that ledger that says when a certain condition is hit, or when a certain program runs and everybody agrees that that condition is the same and the results are the same, then that writes a new entry to the ledger. And there's a lot of more complexity to it than that, and a lot more interesting nuances to that. But this is a way, I think, that we get back to an internet that is fundamentally decentralized, that fundamentally, gets us out of the original sin of being client-server, which led us to, everybody using Gmail or everybody using these big centralized services. Instead, can we get back to a distributed internet? And I think this is a big part of it.
Yeah. So
I'm laughing right now because this was exactly my talk yesterday. So I'm glad we're thinking along the same wavelength here.
Sorry, I missed it.
No, this is great. So from my perspective, I'm really excited about the potential for blockchains to bring this new decentralized internet forward. And part of what I see is the ability to have the transaction layer for the internet that we never had. Yeah. Back in the early days of the internet, the creators envisioned, say, a payment layer, an e-cash layer for the internet, and it just wasn't possible back then. And as I mentioned yesterday in my talk, one of the major problems distributed blockchains solve is the double spend problem. Know that if one individual spent a currency or even made a transaction, that can't happen again across the distributed layer. And right now, for example, on the internet, it's so easy for me to send a video or a photo to somebody. But why can't I send value to somebody just as easily? And I see blockchains solving that problem in a really interesting way.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I found very passionate about it, is that all of our life, we've had digital value, but we've never actually been able to own it individually. There's always been an intermediary. And so, with the advent of Bitcoin, we finally had a currency that you could, for the first time ever, have digital value that was only controlled by a single person. It didn't require an intermediary to transfer it or to hold it. And then now that then is expanded with new blockchain technologies, such as what Jutta is working on, to be able to have the programmability layer. Because once something is digital, it's now programmable. So that to me is kind of what's exciting about this technology, kind of a high level, not really describing so much exactly what it is.
I'm very excited about especially the non-financial use cases that people think about. So for example, if you look at supply chains where you have information that needs to be passed on between many different actors, it's like a global problem. And how do you make sure that actually a product that you buy in a shop is authentic, comes with authenticity, proving it's actually fair trade. And so blockchain could be this layer that allows to send this strong economic signal all along the supply chain from the farmer to the end consumer in the shop.
So in a way, it's still a transfer of value mechanism, but instead of it being the value being a currency, the value is the proof of authenticity of a product or a subset of what's building that product and what you're referring to.
Yeah, I think Jutta mentions a use case that's, I think, actually really working today is the way that you can track either physical goods or digital goods in a public blockchain, and you can prove the authenticity. For example, there's a university in France who has a hash or a proof of existence for every diploma they give to a student, so that when you interview for a job, the company can check that the diploma actually exists and has been given to the student.
And it's a certificates that we should own and should be able to prove, not LinkedIn, because they know everything about us.
Yep. And because this is the public blockchain stuff. This is so everybody can read everything. That's the concept of the public blockchain. It's fully transparent, so that's really cool. And a lot of the big companies we work with tend to also look at the blockchain as a way to perform private transactions. So it's still peer-to-peer transactions, but instead of happening to the public, they happen between a consortium of companies that work together, but have a need to maybe simplify some business processes, or maybe remove some middlemen or central systems. And the blockchain helps also. And so in this case, they are really looking for optimizations, making their business either cheaper or faster, and optimizing their processes. And it's a different kind of use cases, I guess.
This is really important to double down on. I mean, blockchains are not just about cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are one application of them, right? But there are plenty of other applications for tracking of data, for tracking of other digital assets. Sometimes things that are public, that are public-oriented kinds of information systems, like the DNS system, for example, could be reformed as a blockchain. But
you have Namecoin, which is already kind of doing. Was it an early experiment in doing so?
Sure, but what turned a lot of people away from Bitcoin in the early days was proof of work, which is this idea of running a lot of CPU power in order to run a lottery to figure out who gets to put the next link in the chain. And as an environmentalist, so to speak, I mean, as somebody who likes to think of oneself as somewhat environmental, that seemed crazy to me, right? And it's still the best way we know of to do a public cryptocurrency. But
by the way, I recently read that the entire Bitcoin network uses less energy than an Airbus.
It's still, right? And we all flew
over
here.
some amount of time.
You always have to have comparison with what's the
maybe
alternative.
I'm just saying that I think a lot of people have stayed out of this space because of that sense that it wasn't an environmentally friendly kind of thing to be doing. Plus, because it was so currency driven, there was that sense of how much is currency speculation the basis of everyone who talked about the value in the system. If you pull back from it and you talk about things like provenance tracking, right? The diamond industry is moving to move its entire tracking system onto a blockchain. And this is a way to be able to tell that diamond you hold in your hand, what mine did it come from, right? And this is to keep blood diamonds out of circulation. It's also to address the fact that synthetic diamonds are now going to look as good as real diamonds. So people are going to want organic kind of proof of where their diamonds came from.
Right.
This is a system that does not require a cryptocurrency or proof of work to actually run. This is something that industry gets together and says, we'll build a chain, we'll make this work, and we'll build interfaces to the outside world. And this will create, it already in pilot has found millions of dollars in fraud that is either indicative of poor record keeping or actual conflict diamonds entering the system. When it moves to being the system of record, that's when we'll see some really interesting things take place.
So I believe in open, decentralized systems, and the example you just gave is a really interesting industry consortium. But I do believe we need the Bitcoins and the Ethereums of the world because anybody can build on top of them. Yeah. Anybody can see the transactions, right? It's open to the world. It's the equivalent of the early internet. And then we'll see these private instances of industries working together in consortia. But to have those open decentralized networks, you need the incentive structure for those to continue to, say, mine via proof of work, which is the means by which, the algorithm for Bitcoin mining, or there are other examples in the ecosystem that people are working on, including what's called proof of stake for. And within the technical community, people like to argue as to whether that will actually work in practice in a large-scale network. But to me, there's been a lot of talk of the private blockchains, and we don't like Bitcoin, but we love blockchains. And the open decentralized networks are extremely important, and we shouldn't, overlook that.
So the setup of these consortia actually will impose like strong restrictions on like normal users of the system. So if you think of this, the provenance use case where you want to track things throughout the supply chain, what I'm excited about is that this technology provides you like this organizational structure out of the box that even a small farmer can use without having to rely on these big consortia and again like the big corporates in the world.
Right. That's actually one of the trends. If you look at any disruptive technology over the past 20, 30, 100, 300 years, it tends to take something that was only accessible by a small number of people and decentralize that access. Right. Bring it to more people. 3D printing is doing that. You know, the printing press did that relative to monks. And so I fundamentally do believe that, you know, having broader access to the technology, to a blockchain, helps really drive its adoption. We kind of started touching on a few of the use cases, and I think this is one thing that a lot of people ask. I just came from a presentation by PwC on some use cases that they're trying to analyze. Within the scope of what we see as potential use cases, what do we think are some of the closest, really ready, almost ready to launch use cases of the blockchain outside of just the currency? Obviously, the currency is already there. Yeah. But what do we think are some of the most exciting, very close to launch use cases?
So I think we just mentioned kind of the proof of existence, notarization. There's a whole landscape there. You can notarize, you know, emails, documents. They can be digital, they can be paper. You can track digital goods. You can trade digital goods. Okay, so that's a whole sector that's actually, I think, working today. I mean, it can be done on the public blockchain today using Bitcoin, using Ethereum. And by the way, just a little, maybe a remark on the public blockchain stuff. I think it's really important that those technologies are actually battle-tested and war-tested in the public out there, because we know, looking at Bitcoin and Ethereum, it has sustained a lot of large-scale attacks. So at some point, we can be pretty sure that they're really solid and that they've been tested all around. So I think it's super important to have a public blockchain out there that is also a battleground to ensure the technology works.
Yeah. Cool. And there will definitely be a mix of public and private blockchains, no question about that. I think the interesting question will be how much of the software underneath both modes can be shared in common, right? And in many cases, there will be common technologies. There'll be ways to build bridges between those chains as well, protocols like Interledger, right? But it could be that those two different modes are as different as, say, in the database world between SQL databases that are ACID compliant and no SQL databases with eventual consistency, right? And it depends on the use cases. So getting back to your question, there's a CLS bank, which very few people have heard of, but is the bank that handles the interwire transfers between central banks in the world. They process $5 trillion a day in nominal value of paper between these different banks. They're moving to a private ledger, a shared ledger between those banks as a replacement for their hub and spoke network to keep track of all of that data in a way that is much more decentralized than it is today. It still depends upon organizations like them or SWIFT or DTCC or others to act as facilitators of the network, of certifiers of participants in that network to make sure that it runs well, but it removes those as now the central gateways. And I think that's a big advance. And I think it's something that helps move us towards people being more comfortable even with the public chains down the road.
I see a fundamental advantage of using the software. It's actually been employed on the public network because of its higher security. It's being run in a very adversarial environment, and you're never going to get the environment that you need in order to test such a software if you're just building like something for the enterprise. And I think this also relates to that I hope that this software is going to improve like security of the internet overall, and like makes us being the owners of our identities on the web, like all these issues that people hope this technology can improve.
Right. Yeah, along the lines of identity, actually, one of my most exciting use cases for the blockchain doesn't really even include a blockchain at all. I think the blockchain has actually opened the entire technical and non-technical ecosystem up to just cryptography in general, and especially just public-private key cryptography.
Digital signatures as well has become public-private key crypto is now a big deal.
Digital signatures can do a lot for helping both identity and security of the internet. We should be authenticating with services using digital signatures. Far more secure, in some ways much easier to use and much more scalable, so much more auditable as well from an auditability point of view, whether that audit trail be on a blockchain or just on a centralized server. Having those digital signatures, I think, is what I would say, since we're surrounded by a lot of people in kind of conventional technology, not blockchain related, a way for them to incorporate the first nugget of blockchain technology without the entire gamut. But yeah.
So one of the use cases I'm excited about is putting assets on blockchains. So for example, there's technology called Sidechains that is effectively pegged to, say, the Bitcoin, or you could theoretically build it for other blockchains where you can issue another asset. And with the technology we're building with Lightning, you can actually exchange assets instantly and trustlessly between those chains. And I do believe within the next 12 months, we'll see some people trying to, we've already seen experiments with private equity for a company that's private via NASDAQ. So I do believe we'll start to see more assets that are going to go on-chain, and you'll have the ability to exchange and trade in a way that was not previously possible.
So we're all excited about many things that the blockchain can't do or can do. What about dispelling the hype? I fundamentally think the blockchain is great at a few things. It can't do everything, and I hear a lot of projects that just want to brew coffee with a blockchain. What do we think are some of the things that it is not ideal for? Like, what are the hype that really it doesn't deserve in the space?
Yesterday in my talk, I had a slide where somebody wanted to put his dog on a blockchain. It was a joke. But
Yeah. So in many cases, I do think there will be a lot of disappointment for using like these private blockchains. I mean, unless there is actually this kind of third generation of blockchains that can then tie the private blockchains to the public network, because I mean that's what we've seen for the internet as well, right? It only became valuable like once we could all talk to each other. So otherwise, I mean, in most cases, I think disappointment will just come from the fact that for some things, it will just take a bit longer for the technology to mature. But I do think it's a very powerful way of redesigning the web.
Yeah, I think for the blockchain to make sense, we have obviously seen a lot of customers thinking that it was brewing coffee or solving crazy problems. In order for it to be applicable or really useful, first you need to have several parties. It can be several companies, several entities within a big company, several entities that have some form of communication or trust issues, if you want, and who want either to get rid of a central authority that is making the middleman for the transactions, or is just trying to optimize their processes and remove some red tape. So I think it's really good to have several entities, some form of distrust or communication issues, because the blockchain is really good at solving that. The immutability of the blockchain is really a powerful feature. The fact that you cannot go back in time and modify stuff.
Well, unless the entire community wants to do it, as we recently saw.
Right. Hello, right to be forgotten.
Well, yeah. So personal information in there is kind of an issue for sure. Yeah. So that's typical non-starter, to be honest. PII in the public blockchain is kind of an issue. And so, if you get those, and if you get the power of the blockchain is being able to do peer-to-peer transactions. Very generic, a transaction can be anything, can be coding a contract, moving a piece of digital data somewhere. So typically, for example, in private blockchain, like the microgrids projects that have been going on in Brooklyn, I think, where a neighborhood can exchange energy, basically sell excess energy to his neighbors and then buy back some energy when he needs it from his neighbor. That's peer-to-peer. You remove the middleman. You have some form of limited trust between the parties, I'd say. And there's no real currency. There's no real money. It can be a purely virtual currency that exists within this group of people, and that works fairly well.
Yeah, cool. I think your question about what isn't appropriate. I mean, it's like 1994 in the web, right? And in '94, you wouldn't have put a bank with its retail front end on the web because you didn't have SSL at the time or TLS, right? You didn't have JavaScript. You only barely had background colors for web pages, right? So it's still pretty primitive right now. But I would say most companies should be asking themselves, where in their business are there gateways, are there gatekeepers for transaction networks that they're doing with their peers, with their other businesses, right? With companies that they work with. And in those touch points to the outside world, that there may be opportunities to reform how they work or to disrupt an 800-pound gorilla in that market by working with other companies on a common chain somewhere, right? Whether on the public networks, whether as a private network. Every Fortune 500 company should be thinking about this. I think every startup company should be thinking about this at some point or anticipating for a future where this becomes commonplace. But it being 94 in the web, it was still too early to tell everybody, change everything and start a book selling operation. Turns out that would have been a good idea, but it's hard to tell. It's really hard to tell right now.
By the way, in my talk, I said it's 1995 for blockchains.
Oh, okay.
So we're really
You're more
on the same
optimistic
page
than I
here,
am.
you
That's
know?
great. Okay.
About the same time, 94, 95. We can debate.
Joey Ito says 89 in the web.
Oh, really?
So,
okay,
yeah,
well, so from my standpoint, I do think blockchains have actually opened up the world to databases. And actually, databases can be rather useful. So in a world in which you have entities that do trust each other, where there isn't the trust issue, a database can work just fine and can actually be far more efficient and can be quite a bit faster. Blockchains work very well where you have either adversarial individuals or individuals that for legal or whatever reasons do not want to have to trust the other, or there's the potential that the database could be corrupted or modified or tampered with. So you also, I think, have the idea that financial institutions that have been using, for example, COBOL, right, really old technology for decades upon decades, have been opened up to the fact that, hey, we live in a new world now where there's a new type of technology broadly that you can use. So a blockchain may not always make sense. It might just mean that you should build your technology using 2016, frameworks. So I think we're hearing that the blockchain can do everything. I love this technology. I think there's a huge amount of potential, but it's not a panacea. Right. It will not solve all problems. It won't even scale to solve every single problem. For example, let's say every page request on the web would be on a blockchain. Well, that's going to be pretty difficult to scale. So it's important that we work on the use cases that it actually can solve and the inefficiencies that exist today in our system.
And in many cases, where it's most beneficial, it involves actors that these days don't work so much with each other. So also getting governments to adopt the technologies which are inherently slow in adopting technology. So, but I mean, if you think look at Estonia, who are already digitizing a lot of processes, for funding a company, starting a company, that's where I see especially in these smaller countries, the technology flourishing very, very early on.
Very, very cool. For me, coming into the security space with blockchain tech, the thing that I hear a lot of companies say is, oh my God, just put it on a blockchain. It just becomes more secure automatically. With respect to documents that need actual hiding from people, you want something to be secure as far as visibility from untrusted parties. A blockchain is always more open than not using a blockchain. Even a private blockchain inherently makes the information more public across the participants. So I've always said, well, security isn't automatically given by using a blockchain. You have to apply it more specifically. Now, with respect to applying it, we've got a lot of people here that are startups. How would you say people should get started if they want to start utilizing blockchain technology or tinkering with it?
So actually, I wanted to take a poll of the audience.
Yeah, let's do that.
I'd like to poll how many people here either have a blockchain startup or working in blockchain somehow with their company. Show of hands.
Okay. Wow, it's actually more than I would have thought.
Okay.
Awesome.
Oh.
Awesome. So one of the things that's so exciting about this technology is you can literally start a company with 3 people, and you can build a new infrastructure for the internet. For example, with Lightning, we were originally 3. We're now about 6. And there isn't this barrier to entry that previously, if we wanted to build a new banking system and work with banks, we'd probably need a whole lot more people. So there's really a huge opportunity for people that want to learn about the technology. Another great thing is, well, it turns out there aren't people that have had a decade of experience in blockchain, because blockchains have not existed for a decade. So anybody that's excited about the technology and that wants to learn, I mean, there's so much, possibly too much information on the internet now. It can be hard to wade through, but there are some really great resources, including crypto textbooks, lots of kind of wiki pages and blog posts and all of that. So if you're excited, you can read up, and frankly, in a few months, you can really gain a deep level of knowledge. And maybe, okay, from an engineering standpoint, you'd probably want about a year, but it's totally feasible for students. Before I came here, was in Riga, Latvia, had somebody come up to me and started asking me advanced questions about Bitcoin. I said, oh, what do you do? He told me he's a high school student. So to me, that's really inspiring that anybody can learn and anyone can get started.
So yeah, I mean, I got involved 2 years ago just by starting to go to meetups. I mean, one thing I like especially about like this community, is that people are really, really open and like take the time to explain stuff. So I've met so many great people during the last 2 years, which to me is one of the most exciting things about working in this space. And they are all open, take the time to explain and show you stuff.
By the way, it's never boring in this space. There's always
sure.
drama or interesting things
exactly.
happening.
You
So
want a soap opera in technology, you've got it right here in blockchain.
No, yeah.
Ways to get started? Probably some platforms that Microsoft offers
get started.
for people?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we do that. So yeah, what we try to do is, especially again, as seen from our window, large enterprises, corporate customers, they have a hard time getting started with that. And so we approach the startup angle from another way. We try to help startups get on our Azure cloud so that they become visible to all these corporate customers who want to try out things. So there are lots of great open source projects out there. So yeah, there's a vast amount of technical information you can look at. I like to start, top down rather than bottom up, because if you go and start learning about mathematics and cryptography, and you start from this level, it will take a while before you write your first smart contract, for example. Right. I like to see what the technology can do, and it's really super easy. I mean, if you take some of the open source technologies there, if you'd like to use Azure or any other thing, you can start up a node in like 5 minutes and have your first hello world contract, and then you can learn by observing, what happens when I call this contract? What are the transactions going on? What is in a transaction? Oh, there's a signature. Oh, I can see the content of my transaction is actually in the clear. It's not encrypted. So you can observe all this stuff and learn a bit more about what the blockchain is all about by looking at it. And then once you've done that, you can go back and learn about, asymmetric keys and stuff like that.
if you think about it, it's pretty amazing that in 5 minutes you can spin up financial infrastructure. Like even 10 or 20 years ago, imagine if that was possible.
Great. Awesome. Well, I hope all of you out there actually go and start tinkering and playing with blockchain technology. As Jutta said, meetups are great. My entire company was founded through going to meetups and finding co-founders there. So we'll be here as well, so feel free to ask us any questions afterwards. And I think we're about to wrap it up. Thank you so much for everyone for joining in the
Thank you, Paul.
little fireside chat.
Oh, yeah.
Take care.